The sky over Ashfall Bay was the color of a fresh bruise, pressed tight against the waterline of the eastern seaboard. Nor'easter Magnus had clawed its way up the coast, not as a storm, but as a judgment. It tore the harbor apart with winds hitting 90 miles an hour, ripping fishing boats from their moorings and smashing them against the pylons of the wharf. The sea, whipped into a gray, churning froth, surged over the barriers, flooding the lower streets with a frigid, angry tide. Power grids failed in sequence, plunging entire districts into darkness punctuated by the electric blue-white flash of dying transformers. Through the scream of the wind, the city's emergency sirens wailed a long, continuous note of despair. Juniper Hale, 25 years old, was a ghost moving through the chaos. She kept her head down, her body angled against the horizontal rain that felt less like water and more like shattered glass. Her jacket, already soaked through, weighed her down, but her grip was iron on the strap of a ragged backpack. Inside it, wrapped in a plastic grocery bag, was a single external hard drive. It was the only proof she had, the only leverage, the only thing that stood between her and oblivion. It was her entire defense. She was navigating Silver Key, a district of old warehouses and new condos that had become a wind tunnel. Debris siding, garbage lids, shattered glass cartwheeled down the flooded avenues. Juniper's breath hitched in her chest, a ragged sob that the storm instantly stole. She was running on reserves that had emptied hours ago. Her ankle turned on a submerged curb, and she stumbled, catching herself. Pushing forward, she didn't know where she was going, only that she had to keep moving. She reached an intersection where the traffic lights swung dark and dead. She tried to cross the wide median, a concrete divider slick as if it had been greased. Her foot slipped. Juniper went down hard, her body slamming against the concrete. She felt a sharp, searing pain as her forearm scraped against the rough edge, tearing skin, blood, warm and immediate, bloomed on her arm, instantly diluted by the driving rain. She tried to push herself up, but her limbs felt heavy, disconnected. The shriek of the wind filled her ears, drowning her own labored breathing. Her vision blurred, the streetlights at the far end of the quay dissolving into hazy, swimming stars. Headlights cut through the deluge, two piercing beams of white light that belonged to something heavy and impervious. A black armored SUV, the kind that didn't just drive through a storm but dominated it, parted the rising water like a shark. Inside, Caspian Rourke watched the wipers fight a losing battle against the downpour. He was returning to his waterfront estate, his mind on logistics, on ships rerouted, and on the delicate, dangerous process of restructuring the Rourke Syndicate into a legitimate global logistics enterprise. His driver, Cade, slowed the vehicle. "Boss, someone's down, on the median." Caspian's first instinct was a cold, hard shield. Problems belonging to other people were quicksand. Involvement was a vulnerability he had spent a lifetime eradicating. His rule was simple: do not engage. He looked past the woman, toward the blue sparks erupting from a transformer box just yards away from her. The thing was spitting electricity, a frantic, deadly pulse. He saw her then, not just as a problem, but as a person, curled into a fetal position, shaking, one arm bleeding onto the wet concrete. She was small, drowning in the gray. The transformer sparked again, violently. His rule fractured. He didn't look at Cade or his other man, Ilya. He just spoke, his voice a low command that cut through the storm's roar inside the cabin. Get her in the car. No calls. The two men were out in an instant, shadows moving with practiced efficiency. Juniper felt herself being lifted, a sensation so sudden and disorienting she hadn't the strength to fight. Hands, strong and impersonal, secured her. A moment later, she was being pushed into the back of the SUV, onto heated leather. The door slammed shut with the heavy, final sound of a vault closing. The sudden silence was deafening, the storm reduced to a frantic, muffled drumming on the roof, like 1,000 hammers trying to get in. The SUV accelerated, its engine a deep thrum beneath her. She saw the speedometer needle climb as they sped through streets that were now shallow rivers. She shivered, the cold seeping into her bones, but the heated seat was a strange, localized warmth against her back. They didn't slow. The vehicle approached a massive set of wrought iron gates set into a high seawall. The floodgates parted smoothly, and the SUV climbed a steep drive. As they cleared the wall, Juniper heard the deep, resonant thrum of industrial generators kicking in. A sound of absolute power and control. The estate was an island of light and stability in the churning darkness. The vehicle stopped under a stone portico. The door opened. This time, it was not Cade or Ilya. It was the man from the front seat. He didn't wait. Caspian Rourke leaned in, sliding one arm under her knees and the other behind her back, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. He carried her through massive oak doors into a grand foyer paved with stone that was slick with salt spray blown in from the terrace. Two figures were waiting, illuminated by the warm light of gas lamps, a severe-looking woman in a crisp uniform. Valera Quinn, the estate's housekeeper, held a stack of thick towels. Beside her stood a man with the calm, assessing eyes of a professional. Dr. Huxley Morrow, the family's private physician, his bag already open on a marble table. Caspian didn't break stride. Moving directly toward them, he deposited Juniper onto a chaise lounge, his movements economical and precise. Huxley, check her. Valera, get her warm. Juniper's consciousness was fraying, the adrenaline fading, leaving only the deep, aching cold and the pain in her arm. She looked up, her vision tunneling. The last thing she saw was the man's face looking down at her. His eyes were the color of the storm sea, cold but utterly steady. The last thing she heard was his voice, a low, definitive rumble that vibrated with power. You're safe here. For tonight, that's all. Then the darkness she had been fighting finally claimed her. Juniper woke to the sound of drumming. It was not the violent hammering of the storm, but a softer, persistent tapping. She smelled damp earth and something sharply sweet, like green citrus. Her eyes blinked open, struggling against a heavy fatigue. She was not in the street. She was in a bed, impossibly soft, buried under a thick down comforter. Above her, a ceiling of reinforced glass streamed with rainwater, the sky a churning, bruised purple. She was in an attic conservatory, a glass house perched at the top of the mansion, surrounded by potted citrus trees and climbing vines whose leaves pressed against the glass. The storm felt distant now, its scream muted to a low, continuous rumble. She looked down at herself. Her clothes were gone. She was dressed in a heavy, dark sweatshirt and matching sweatpants, the fabric soft and warm, but ridiculously large on her. Her left arm throbbed with a dull, steady ache. Lifting it, she saw it was clean, and a precise, white bandage was wrapped expertly around her forearm. A shadow moved near the doorway. Caspian Rourke stood there, a silhouette against the lighted hall. He moved into the room, not making a sound on the stone floor. He still wore the dark, impeccably tailored suit from the SUV, but his tie was gone and the top button of his white shirt was undone. He looked as untouched by the chaos as the stone walls of his home. "You're awake," he stated. It was not a question. Juniper pushed herself up on her elbows. The room spun, a wave of vertigo washing over her. "Where am I?" Her voice was a dry rasp. "My home. Dr. Morrow tended to your arm. 6 stitches. He gestured to a glass of water on the bedside table. "He said you have a minor concussion. You're lucky. The transformer you collapsed next to blew out 2 minutes after Cade pulled you away." She absorbed this. Safe. For now. My backpack. By the door, untouched. He watched her, his expression analytical, assessing. "You are safe here while the storm passes," he continued, his voice a level, cool monotone. "But there are rules, 3 of them." He didn't raise his voice, but the command in the room was absolute. 1. You do not make outside calls. The storm has most lines down, and my network is private. 2. You do not wander the lower floors. This wing is yours. Valera, my housekeeper, will bring you anything you need. 3. You do not, under any circumstances, approach the side gate. Juniper stared at him, her throat tight, a prisoner. In exchange, Caspian said, you have shelter, you have dry clothes, and you have the doctor's attention. You stay until Magnus passes. Then you leave. A sudden, brilliant flash of lightning illuminated the glass house, turning the room into a stark, negative image. It was followed almost instantly by a crack of thunder so loud it seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. Juniper did not scream. She reacted without thinking. It was a violent, full-body flinch, a trained response. Her hands flew up to cover her head, her spine bowing as she braced for an impact, for the sound of shattering glass and screaming. Caspian's eyes narrowed. He recognized the movement. It was not the simple panic of a civilian. It was the ingrained, muscle memory reflex of someone accustomed to sudden, violent trauma. She caught herself an instant later, forcing her hands down, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. She clenched her fists on the comforter. "You're used to chaos," he observed, his voice quiet. Juniper looked away, toward the rain lashing the glass. "I was a volunteer EMT during the pandemic," she said, her voice small. "I got used to sirens, to the sounds of the city falling apart. I thought I was... But this..." She swallowed. "This storm feels different." "Why were you in it?" he asked. The question was sharp, direct, cutting through her defense. "Silver Key was under an evacuation order 6 hours ago. You were running..." She thought of the hard drive. She thought of Damon. She hugged her knees to her chest. "I was avoiding an ex." It was the truth, but it was a dangerously small part of it. She would not say his name. Not in this house. Not to this man. The glass walls of the conservatory shuddered under a particularly vicious gust of wind, the sound like a low moan. Caspian watched the tremor in her hands. When he spoke again, the hard, transactional edge in his voice had softened, just a fraction. "Silver Key isn't safe tonight," he said. "The seawall breached an hour ago. The lower streets are under 5 feet of water. You stay here. You're safe here until it passes." It was still in order, but the intention had shifted. It was no longer about containment. It was about protection. The door opened again, and the housekeeper, Valera, entered. She was an imposing woman, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, but she moved with a quiet efficiency. She carried a thick, quilted garment and a pair of new, heavy-duty boots. "This is an electric heating cloak," Valera said. Her tone was professional, her gaze observational, not curious. She was cataloging, not judging. "And these are new waterproof boots. Don't argue. They are from logistics stock." She placed them neatly on a wooden chest at the foot of the bed. Juniper felt a desperate need to be on her own feet, to reclaim some small measure of control. "Thank you. I just need..." She swung her legs over the side of the high bed. The moment her feet touched the cold stone floor, the world dissolved. The vertigo from the concussion, combined with exhaustion and adrenaline crash, hit her like a physical blow. The room tilted, her vision blacking out at the edges. She pitched forward, a gasp leaving her lips. He moved with a speed that defied his calm demeanor. Before she could fall, Caspian was there, his hand clamped firmly around her upper arm, his grip like a steel band, instantly grounding her. He didn't pull her to him, didn't exploit the weakness. He simply held her upright, a solid, immovable object anchoring her in the spinning room. The contact was brief, powerful, and defined by its clear boundary. He held her just long enough for the vertigo to recede, then released his grip as she found her balance. "Slowly," he commanded, his voice low. From the doorway, Cade, the driver, appeared. He set a large stainless steel thermos and a battery-powered shortwave radio on a side table. "Hot cocoa, ma'am? Boss." He nodded once and disappeared. Juniper sat back on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling. The radio crackled to life, already tuned. It wasn't a news station. It was a private dispatch frequency, A gravelly voice was calmly coordinating tugboats, demanding status reports, rerouting a massive container ship named the Rourke's Honor away from the shoals. It was a glimpse. This was not just a rich man in a fortress. This was the man who owned the port, who commanded the ships, who directed the tugs in the middle of a nor'easter. This was Rourke's empire, and she was trapped in its very center. She looked at the man who had saved her, this man of rules and power, the warmth, the dry clothes, the medical care, the hot cocoa. It was a kindness she hadn't known in months, but it came with locks and surveillance. She had to ask. Her voice was barely a whisper, lost under the sound of the rain and the radio dispatcher calmly diverting multi-million-dollar assets. "Why did you help me?" Caspian Rourke stood by the wall of glass, his back to her, watching the fury of the storm he had insulated her from. His reflection stared back at her from the dark glass, his face a mask of impenetrable control. He did not turn. "'Cause I could." By morning, the wind's high-pitched shriek had dropped to a low, guttural howl. Magnus was not gone, but it had paused for breath. Ashfall Bay was unrecognizable, coated in a thick white layer of sea foam that clung to buildings and submerged cars. The world was muffled, gray and still violent. Juniper, stiff and sore, left the conservatory. The house was silent, save for the hum of the generators and the distant roar of the ocean. She was restless, a caged animal. Her concussion had faded to a dull headache, but her mind was sharp. She wandered the upper wing, her stockinged feet silent on the flooring, which was made from dark, reclaimed ship's wood, worn smooth by time. She found a linen closet. Inside, on a shelf, was a large, professional-grade medical trauma kit. She opened it without thinking. Her fingers, moving with an ingrained, practiced dexterity, began to sort the contents. She checked the seals on sterile saline, reorganized the bandages by size, and tightened the cap on a bottle of antiseptic. It was a nervous habit, the muscle memory of her old life as an EMT, a way of imposing order on chaos. She flexed her bandaged forearm. The stitches were tight, the work of an expert. Her exploration led her to the kitchen. It was vast, a stainless steel and dark wood expanse that could have serviced a restaurant. It was also immaculate and empty, but the pantry was a different story. It was stocked like a bunker, prepared for a month-long siege. She found tins of chopped clams, bags of potatoes, onions, celery, flour, butter, heavy cream. She washed her hands and began to cook. This, she knew, this was control. This was something to do other than wait. Caspian was in the security room, a windowless space in the core of the house. A wall of high-definition monitors showed him every angle of his property, the breached seawall at Silver Key and the live status of his ships huddling in safe harbors. The storm had cost him millions in logistics delays, but his assets were secure. He was reading an encrypted damage report from Cade when a new, unexpected scent cut through the sterile, air-conditioned chill. It was not the smell of salt, ozone, or wet stone. It was celery and black pepper. It was thyme and simmering cream. It was the smell of food, real food. He left the operations room and followed the scent. A strange, disorienting pull. He found her at the massive gas range, standing on a small stool to comfortably stir a large pot. She was wearing his clothes, the sleeves of the sweatshirt rolled up a dozen times. Her hair was pulled back in a messy knot, and her face was flushed from the steam. She looked impossibly small and intensely focused. She didn't hear him approach. When she turned to grab a spoon, she saw him and jumped, her hand flying to her chest. "I'm sorry," she stammered. "The pantry was open. I was restless. I can stop." Caspian just looked at the pot, then at her. He gave a single, curt nod toward the cabinet. Bowls. The meal was eaten in absolute silence. They sat at opposite ends of the massive butcher block island. The only sounds were the scrape of silver spoons against heavy ceramic and the persistent, low groan of the wind outside. Juniper ate quickly. her eyes on her bowl. Caspian ate slowly, methodically. He was a man who was accustomed to giving orders, to transactions, to conversations that were negotiations. He was not accustomed to this domestic, unasked-for quiet. Their eyes met once, a fleeting collision. Her gaze was wary, assessing. His was unreadable. She looked away first. When he finished, he pushed the bowl forward an inch. He cleared his throat, but instead of speaking, he gave another short, sharp nod. It was not a request for more. It was a clear, concise, and startling acknowledgement. It was thank you. Later, Valera found Juniper by a window overlooking the churning, foam-flecked bay. The housekeeper held out a pair of heavy, fleece-lined, waterproof gloves. "For your hands," Valera said, her voice flat. "The salt air will ruin them." Juniper took them, surprised. "Thank you, Valera." Valera's gaze drifted to the storm. Her expression, usually so severe, softened for a fraction of a second. "In this house," she said, her voice low, "every one of us owes the storm something." She turned and left before Juniper could ask what she meant. The truce held as the day bled into a gray, violent evening. Caspian found her in the conservatory, tracing the patterns of the rain on the glass. "Come with me," he said. He led her not down, but up, through a narrow door she hadn't noticed, up a tight, winding staircase. It opened onto the flat, true roof of the mansion, a space fortified like a bunker, in the center. A small, private radar dish spun tirelessly against the wind. The air was a physical assault, cold and wet, and she instinctively pulled her sweatshirt tighter. "The Port Authority radar is good," Caspian yelled over the wind, "but mine is better. It's an old military-grade array." He pointed to the screen on its pedestal. "I use the weather patterns to predict shipping routes, how the currents will shift, or the channels will dredge or silt up. Knew a storm like this was coming 3 weeks ago." He looked out at the sea, his profile harsh against the gray sky. "I grew up on those docks. We were so poor. We lived on a trawler that barely floated. I learned to read the sky before I learned to read a book. That's how you get an edge. You see what's coming when everyone else is just looking at what's here." It was a confession, a piece of his past, offered up as plainly as the radar array. The unexpected vulnerability broke something open in her, staring at his hands, braced on the railing. She spoke. "His name is Damon Klein." Caspian went still. He did not turn. "My ex," Juniper continued, her voice gaining a desperate strength. "He's a coordinator for the 7th Pier crew. He launders their money. He thinks I have proof." She stopped, her hand unconsciously moving to her stomach, as if protecting the hard drive that was no longer there. She didn't mention the drive. "He was stalking me. He said he wouldn't let me go. That's why I was running." Caspian turned his head slowly. He looked at her, his eyes searching her face in the gloom. He didn't ask what proof. He didn't ask for details. The admission hung in the air, swallowed by the storm. He just nodded. "Once. Now, you are here." He took her back inside, but the house had changed. Later, Juniper saw Cade, no longer driving, but standing watch at the end of the hallway. From the conservatory window, she saw a new, small red light glowing in the alley below, an infrared camera. The house was no longer just a shelter from the storm. It was a fortress, and its walls had just closed around her. Night fell. The generators, pushed to their limit for over a day, sputtered. The lights in the conservatory flickered, buzzed, and died, plunging the glass house into a suffocating, absolute darkness. The only light was the distant, eerie blue flashes of the failing city grid. Juniper gasped, a raw sound of animal fear. Her breath hitched, coming in short, panicked pants. The darkness was a living thing. The same darkness from the alley where Damon had first cornered her. She heard a soft click, a gentle, vinyl hiss. A moment later, the low, mournful sound of a saxophone filled the room, followed by the soft shh-shh of brushes on a snare drum. Caspian was there, a dark shape near a cabinet she hadn't noticed. He had put a record on a turntable. He didn't turn on a flashlight or a lantern. He just let the vintage jazz bleed into the dark. The music was slow, measured, a heartbeat in the black. He moved to stand a few feet away from her. "Breathe with the drums," he said. His voice was a low rumble, a new anchor in the dark. Juniper closed her eyes, forcing herself to listen. She focused on the steady, gentle rhythm. Thump, thump. Shh, thump, thump. Shh. She drew in a shaky breath, held it, and let it out, matching the beat. The saxophone wept, but the drums were steady. Her panic, sharp and acidic, slowly receded, replaced by the music. Hours later, the storm still howled, but inside, the only sound was the static of the needle in the record's final groove. Juniper had fallen asleep, curled into a deep leather armchair, the house blanket Valera had given her slipping from her shoulder. Caspian sat at a desk, reviewing logistics manifests by the light of a single, battery-powered lamp. He looked over and saw her. He stood, his own body aching with fatigue. He walked to the chest and picked up the quilted, electric heating cloak. He moved quietly, draping it over her, tucking it around her small frame. His gaze fell on her hand, resting on the arm of the chair. Even in the dim light, he could see the angry, red cracks on her knuckles from the wind and salt. He hesitated. Then, with a lightness that belied his strength, he brushed his thumb over the back of her hand. It was a ghost of a touch. Gone, for it could register. He pulled the cloak over her hand, sealing in the warmth, before returning to his watch. The rhythm of the house shifted on the second day. The storm still raged, but a new, more dangerous pressure was building inside. It began with the quiet, encrypted buzz of Cade's phone. He read the message in the security room, his face impassive, and showed the screen to Caspian. The Bureau of Interstate Racketeering Control, a new, ruthlessly efficient federal task force, had just launched Operation Cold Mooring. It was a multi-agency sweep targeting every shadow network on the eastern seaboard. Caspian Rourke's name was high on their list. Caspian stared at the message, his jaw tightening. "They're 2 steps behind," he said, his voice a low growl. "They think this is about the old routes. They don't see the restructuring." "They're being pointed, boss," Cade said. "This smells like a setup." "It is," Caspian said. "There's a leak. Someone inside is feeding Damon Klein's crew my clean shipping manifests. The 7th Pier is using my legitimate routes as cover, running their contraband right under my name. Burke gets an anonymous tip. They raid my clean ship, and I take the fall. I'm squeezed from both sides." "Ilya," Cade asked, his voice low. "Ilya is too clean, too perfect," Caspian mused. "Keep him close. For now, we find the source." Juniper was not in the conservatory, restless. She had found her way to Caspian's private study, a room of dark wood, leather, and the faint, clean smell of old paper and sea charts. He hadn't forbidden her this room. He had been working at the desk, a massive screen on the wall displaying a complex logistics map. He had been called away by Cade, and the screen remained active. She was drawn to it, fascinated by the intricate web of shipping lanes. A sidebar on the screen showed cargo details for a ship named the Astra. She saw a digital image of a shipping container, and on its side, a stenciled logo, a stylized phoenix rising from a wave. The blood in her veins went cold. She flashed back, a memory so sharp it made her gasp. Damon's cramped, humid apartment, him hunched over his laptop, the screen glow casting his face in a sick, blue light. He'd been angry, yelling at her. "I don't care what you think. Junie, just print the damn invoices. It's just a logo for a new client." He had turned the screen. She saw an email. Attached were dozens of invoices, all bearing that same emblem of phoenix rising from a wave. She stared at Caspian's screen, the pieces clicking into place with a sickening lurch. The hard drive in her backpack. It wasn't just random proof she had stolen in a panic. Damon had been using her, making her print decoy invoices, creating a false paper trail. He wanted this proof to exist. The hard drive wasn't just a shield, it was a lure. It was a weapon he had intended to use. And now she had brought it directly into the home of the one man he was trying to frame. A sudden, sharp clatter from the hallway, the sound of silver hitting stone. Juniper spun around. Valera stood in the doorway, a silver tray and the shattered remnants of a water glass at her feet. The housekeeper's face was ashen, her professional calm completely shattered. It was the most terrifying thing Juniper had seen since the storm began. "Ma'am," Valera whispered, her eyes wide with a fear that was not for herself. "Sir, there is someone at the fence line. Zone 4. Caspian was in the hall instantly, Cade at his side. "On screen," Caspian ordered. Cade was already manipulating the feeds in the main security room. He brought up the camera for Zone 4, a wooded, dark section of the perimeter. The infrared camera cut through the rain. A figure in a black rain slicker was half hidden behind a utility box. As they watched, the figure raised a hand, and a small, dark object lifted into the air, whirring. "A drone," Cade said, his voice tight. "It's got a directional mic. They're listening to the house." The shift in Caspian was immediate. The calculating strategist vanished, replaced by a cold, coiled predator. His voice was ice. "Valera, take her to the map room, now." The map room was not a study. It was a vault, tucked into the core of the house. It was windowless, its walls reinforced concrete to withstand a direct tidal surge. It was filled with floor-to-ceiling wooden racks, holding thousands of rolled nautical charts. Caspian followed them in and engaged the heavy, bank vault-style lock. The room became utterly silent. He turned to Juniper, his face a mask. He pulled a folded sheet of paper from his jacket. "This is a diagram of the service tunnels. It leads to the old wharf, 2 blocks south. If Cade or I do not come back in 20 minutes, you take this and you run. Do you understand?" Juniper stared at the paper. Then she looked at him, and for the first time, her fear was eclipsed by a sudden, hot wave of anger. She didn't take the paper. "I'm not cargo. Caspian." He stared at her, uncomprehending. "What?" "I'm not a package," she said, her voice shaking but gaining force. "I'm not another one of your assets to be routed and protected and hidden in a vault. I won't be moved around like freight." His patience, already worn thin by the Burke and the drone, snapped. He stepped into her space, crowding her against a rack of charts. "Right now," he hissed, his voice dangerously low, "that is exactly what you are. You are a liability. You are the proof Damon Klein needs to sink my entire operation. You are a problem I am choosing to protect. You will do exactly as I say." "Or what?" she challenged, her chin high, her heart hammering. "You'll lock me in here. Is that it, my freedom in exchange for your safety?" He gripped her upper arm, his fingers digging in, not gently like before, but with a controlled, possessive force that stole her breath. "Your freedom ends where my security begins," he bit out. His eyes were blazing, all pretense of calm gone. "You belong here tonight." The words hung in the silent, sealed room. "You belong here." It was a raw, possessive slip, and they both heard it. The air crackled, the argument forgotten, replaced by a sudden, stark intimacy that was more dangerous than the fight. A sharp buzz from the intercom on the wall broke the tension. It was Cade. "Boss, I'm getting a high-priority interrupt on the port radio. Anonymous encrypted source. Patching it through." A crackle of static, and then a distorted, digital voice filled the small room. "We are looking for a woman, Juniper Hale, 25, last seen in the Silver Key district. There is a substantial reward for information." Cade cut the feed, plunging the room back into silence. Juniper felt the blood drain from her face. Her knees went weak. They were using her name, on an open channel. It wasn't a search, it was an advertisement. Damon was flushing her out. Caspian released her arm, his touch suddenly gentle, but his face was hard. He stepped back, his mind racing, recalibrating. "He's not just hunting you," he said, thinking aloud. He's making you radioactive. He's using you to draw me out." He looked at her, the woman who was the source of all this, the woman he had just claimed in a moment of anger. A new, dangerous light sparked in his eyes. "He thinks he has you cornered. He thinks I'm trapped in here, protecting you." "Caspian." "We're going to change the rhythm of the hunt," he said, cutting her off. He hit the intercom. "Valera, find her something to wear, something formal." He turned back to Juniper, a cold, wolfish smile touching his lips. "He wants to flush you out. Fine, we'll go out." Juniper was stunned. Out into... that they're right outside. "The drone is gone," Caspian said. "They're waiting for us to run. We won't... The worst of the storm is over. The Coastal Emergency Authority is holding its annual fundraising gala at the Harbor Magnate Hotel. It's time we hid you in plain sight." Far across the city, in a dark van filled with surveillance equipment, a BARC agent pulled off her headphones. "Sir, Rourke's team just added 2 names to the gala's security list, Caspian Rourke and Juniper Hale." A calm female voice replied over the comms, "Agent Argent Tide, what's your recommendation?" The agent's voice was cool and steady. "We hold our position. Sir, let Rourke be the magnet. Let him lead us directly to Damon." The Harbor Magnate Hotel was an arc of light and civilization, while Ashfall Bay outside was still a landscape of wreckage and dark water. The grand ballroom was a world of impossible, defiant luxury. Thousands of crystal pendants dripped from the chandeliers, refracting the light. The scent of white lilies and orchids was thick in the warm air. A grand piano played a slow, minimalist jazz piece. Caspian Rourke entered as if he owned the room. In many ways, he did. He moved with a quiet, devastating confidence. At his side, Juniper Hale was a study in contrasts. Valera had given her a simple, sleeveless sheath dress of dark wool that clung to her form, and a long, matching coat. Her hair was pulled back, her face scrubbed clean, the exhaustion replaced by a high wire, adrenaline-fueled brightness. Her eyes were sharp, bright, and deeply wary. She missed nothing. Heads turned. Whispers followed them. Caspian Rourke, the myth of the harbor, never attended galas, and never with a woman no one recognized. He did not stop to speak to anyone. He led her directly to the center of the room, to the small, polished dance floor. He turned, placing one hand on the small of her back, the other taking her hand. "Just follow me," he murmured, his voice for her alone. He pulled her close. The dance was slow, barely a movement at all. Her hand rested on the hard muscle of his shoulder. His hand on her back was a brand, a claim. It was firm, yet impossibly gentle. She could feel the steady, slow rhythm of his heart through the fabric of his suit, and her own nervous. Rabbit-quick pulse began to slow, matching his. The deep, thrumming bass of the piano resonated in her chest. For one long, impossible moment, the hunt, the storm, Damon and the Burke faded away. There was only the music, the warmth of his hand, and the solid, grounding presence of his body. It was a truce with the world. Then, his entire body changed. It was almost imperceptible. A tightening of his shoulders. The hand on her back suddenly gripped, his fingers pressing into her. "What is it?" she whispered. He didn't answer. Then he was looking over her shoulder. He pulled back just enough for her to see his phone, which he held in his other hand. It was a text from an unknown number. It was a picture, a candid shot of her, standing by the piano, her head turned toward him. It had been taken moments ago. Underneath it, a simple line of text, "Looking good, Junie." His eyes, when they met hers, were no longer the color of the sea. They were the color of ice, dark and lethally cold. The truce was over. He guided her off the floor, his hand never leaving her back, a shield against the room. "Cade, the suite, now." The penthouse suite was as secure as the map room. Cade and Ilya swept it first, checking every corner, every vent before Cade gave a curt nod and sealed the door behind them. Taking up a position in the hall, Juniper walked directly to the massive floor-to-ceiling window. The rain had returned, a driving, angry sheet against the glass. The city lights below were a fractured, glittering smear. She was breathing too fast, the old panic returning. She felt him come to stand behind her. He did not touch her. They stood in silence for a long moment, their reflections staring back at them from the dark. Rain-lashed glass. Her breath fogged the cold pane in front of her. "He's here," she whispered, her voice breaking. "He found me." "He found us," Caspian corrected, his voice a low rumble. He moved, standing beside her, so close their shoulders brushed. He looked at her. Not the city. He saw the tremor in her hands, the fear in her eyes that was rapidly drowning the anger. He lifted one hand, not to her arm, but to her face. His fingers were warm as he gently cupped her chin, his thumb brushing her jaw. He tilted her face up to his. He didn't speak. He simply asked with his eyes, "Are you here with me?" It was a question of presence, of permission. After a lifetime of being grabbed, of being stalked, of being treated like property, the question was a revelation. Her breath hitched. She gave the slightest, almost invisible nod. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to turn away. He did not. His lips met hers. It was not a kiss of passion, not at first. It was a kiss of grounding. It was slow and deep and deliberate. It was a promise of safety, a transfer of strength. She tasted the faint salt on his skin. He kissed her as if he were mapping new territory, and then her hands, which had been clenched at her sides, unclenched. She lifted one hand, her fingers tangling in the thick hair at the nape of his neck, pulling him closer. The kiss changed. It became a response, a mutual give and take. His other hand came up, framing her face, his thumb stroking her cheekbones. His hands were always visible, respectful, never straying. He allowed her to set the pace, to be the one to deepen the contact. They breathed each other in. She whispered his name against his mouth, a sound of fragile surrender. He whispered hers back, a sound of anchoring promise. She felt a warmth spreading through her chest, a radiant heat that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with this. She felt the slight, involuntary tremble in his hands and realized this was as new for him as it was for her. He was the man of control, and she was the chaos he had let inside. He pulled back, just enough so their foreheads were resting together. They were both breathing fast, small, breathless smiles touching their lips. The panic was gone. The fear was gone. Her heart, which had been pounding, felt suddenly, strangely light, as if the storm had finally passed, leaving this clear, quiet, breathless space. A sharp digital pong from the pocket of her coat, which lay on a nearby chair, shattered the moment. They broke apart. Caspian's eyes were instantly sharp. "Your phone." "I don't have it," when she said, "It's in my backpack, at your house." Caspian moved to the coat, his expression dark. He retrieved her phone from the inner pocket, but it wasn't her phone. It was a burner, and it was displaying a text message, a single active location tracking link. "Someone," he said, his voice pure ice, "planted this on you in the lobby." His own phone buzzed. It was Cade. Caspian put it on speaker. "Boss, we found it. A GPS tag, back of her coat collar, made to look like a port security commission tag. It's a fake. The text signature is 7th Pier." A beat of silence. Damon hadn't just seen her. He had tagged her. Caspian's mind was moving fast. He's not making a move here. Too public. He wants her back on the road. He wants her in transit. He made a decision. "Ilya," he snapped, hitting the suite's intercom. "Get the car. You're escorting Miss. Hail back to the estate. Use the tunnel route. Cade, you're with me. We're going to clean up the tail." "Yes, boss." Ilya's voice came back, smooth as ever. Moments later, Juniper was in the elevator, the dark wool coat clutched in her hand. Cade was there, as was Ilya, who held the door for her. "I'll be right behind you," Cade said to Ilya, his hand on his radio. "Just confirming the route sweep with the boss." The radio on his shoulder crackled with Caspian's low, coded instructions. As Cade was distracted by the radio, Ilya pulled out his own phone. He typed a quick, one-handed message, his thumb moving fast, Juniper standing beside him. Glanced down. He was in a messaging app. He sent a reply. It was just an emoji, a small digital icon, a phoenix rising from a wave. Juniper's blood stopped. The image from Damon's email, the logo on Caspian's shipping containers, the symbol she now knew was the key to the entire setup. And Ilya was using it. The elevator doors began to slide shut. Juniper looked up from the phone, at their reflections in the polished bronze surface. Cade, focused on his duty. Ilya, his face a mask of calm professionalism. And herself. The doors closed, sealing them in. The mirror reflected her face, her eyes wide, the sudden, brilliant, terrifying realization dawning. The warmth from the kiss, the feeling of safety. It all evaporated. The enemy wasn't just outside, he was in the elevator with her. The trust she had just begun to build shattered into 1,000 pieces. The armored sedan moved smoothly away from the hotel's protected sally port. Inside, the silence was a physical weight. Juniper sat in the back, her body rigid. Ilya was in the driver's seat, his movements calm and professional, his eyes on the road. Cade, in a separate, identical car, followed close behind. Juniper's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. Phoenix, 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 the emoji replayed in her mind. Every calm instruction Ilya gave, every glance in the rearview mirror was now a threat. She was in a steel box with the man who had sold her. They ascended the long ramp to the Kingspear Bridge, a high, skeletal arc of steel spanning the dark, churning water of the bay. The wind was still a gale this high up, buffeting the heavy car. The rain lashed the windshield. It happened as they reached the apex of the bridge. A heavy-duty pickup truck, its headlights off, lunged from a construction lane, cutting them off. It wasn't a stop, it was an assault. A barrage of thwacks peppered the sedan. It wasn't gunfire. It was the hard, percussive impact of rubber projectiles, shattering the driver's side window, spraying tempered glass across Ilya. They wanted her alive. Ilya shouted, a convincing performance of surprise. He yanked the steering wheel, not away from the truck, but into it, swerving the sedan sharply into the narrow maintenance lane, pinning the passenger side against the high concrete barrier. Juniper was trapped. She heard the click of the central locks engaging. Ilya was boxing her in. He turned to her, his face no longer professional, but a mask of cold resolve. Damon just wants to talk. Juniper, don't make this difficult. No, she screamed, clawing at the door handle, but it was useless. A roaring engine. Cade, he had seen the betrayal. He didn't slow down. He rammed the follow car directly into the rear of Ilya's sedan. The impact was brutal, a deafening shriek of metal, the force throwing Juniper forward against her seatbelt. The airbags in Ilya's car exploded. A violent, powdery, white cloud that slammed him against his seat. Before the smoke cleared, Cade was out of his car, his weapon drawn, not at the truck, but at Ilya's door. He shattered the rest of the window with the butt of his gun, reached through the deflating airbag and unbuckled Juniper. Out now, Juniper, move. He hauled her, stumbling out of the ruined car and onto the exposed, wind-blasted bridge. The pickup truck's doors flew open, men in dark rain gear piling out. Cade, she screamed, pointing. I see them. Then, from the opposite lane of traffic, a third set of headlights tore through the rain, driving the wrong way. A black SUV, identical to the others, skidded to a halt, positioning itself between Juniper and the men from the truck. The driver's door flew open. Caspian. Get to me, he roared, his voice cutting through the wind. Juniper ran. She didn't think. She just moved, her feet pounding the wet pavement. Cade was right behind her, moving backward, his gun up, creating a path. She was 10 feet away from Caspian when one of the men from the truck raised a handgun. He wasn't firing rubber bullets. A pop, sharp and flat, cut through the howl of the wind. Caspian, who had been reaching for her, didn't flinch. He moved, intercepting her. His body becoming a shield, he grunted, a sharp, punched-out sound. He stumbled, but he didn't fall. He grabbed her, pulling her behind him, shoving her toward the open door of his SUV. "Get in!" But Juniper had seen it. In the flash of the headlights, she saw the dark, wet stain spreading rapidly on the sleeve of his dark suit, not his shoulder, not his chest, his left bicep. Bright, arterial blood pulsed, mingling with the rain. The switch in her was instant. The fear vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. The EMT took over. "You're hit." "I'm fine," he growled, pushing her again. "Get in the car." "No," she snapped. Planting her feet, she grabbed his arm, her fingers finding the wound. It was a clean through and through. "Cade, cover us, Caspian. Look at me." She shoved him against the side of the SUV, out of the direct line of fire. "You are not fine." She ripped off the expensive leather belt from his trousers, her hands moving with a speed that defied the cold. She didn't have time for a perfect tourniquet. She folded it, placed it high above the wound, and yanked it brutally tight, eliciting another sharp grunt. "Direct pressure. Use your other hand. Squeeze it. Hard." She saw his eyes, glazed with shock, begin to clear, focusing on her. "Good," she commanded. "Keep looking at me. Breathe with me. In for 4. Hold for 7. Out for 8. Do it." He did. She saw the tension in his jaw as he fought the pain and followed her command. "Cade," she yelled. "Your phone. The 2-factor one now." Cade, while exchanging suppression fire with the men, tossed it to her. She caught it. Her fingers, slick with rain and Caspian's blood, punched in a number. "Huxley, it's Juniper. Caspian's been hit. Gunshot. Upper bicep. Arterial bleed. I've got a makeshift tourniquet. I need a full hemostatic kit. O negative. And a trauma setup at the north gate. We're coming in hot. 10 minutes." She hung up. Tires screamed. 2 more black cars, decoys, appeared from nowhere, tearing onto the bridge and swerving toward the 7th Pier crew, drawing their fire. "Our exit," Caspian managed, his voice strained. "This way," Cade said, grabbing her, supporting Caspian. "No cars, tunnel." Cade forced open a heavy steel plate on the bridge's pedestrian walkway. It revealed a dark, narrow ladder descending into the bridge's infrastructure. "Go, Juniper, he's right behind me." She went, plunging into the darkness. It was a cramped metal tube, a technical tunnel filled with conduits and the smell of rust and cold, damp iron. Caspian followed. His breathing labored. Cade came last, sealing the hatch above them. They were in a maze, lit only by the emergency lights, the sound of the storm a distant, metallic echo. They moved for 5 minutes, emerging into a vast dark space, an old, decommissioned Rourke warehouse at the foot of the bridge. It was a cavernous place, stacked high with dormant container cranes and acres of empty shipping containers. Cade secured the door, then vanished into the shadows to circle back, to hunt. Juniper pushed Caspian to sit on a stack of wooden pallets, his back against a cold steel container. She checked the belt. It was holding. He was pale, shivering, but his eyes were sharp, focused on her. "You did well," he said. "It's what I do," she said, her voice still sharp. She looked at him, the man who had just taken a bullet for her. "Ilya," she stated. "It was Ilya." Caspian nodded, the movement stiff. "I'm restructuring," he said, his voice low, rough with pain. "Cutting out the shadow routes, moving the entire syndicate to clean, legitimate logistics. It's a 2-year plan." He looked down at his bleeding arm. Ilya was old guard. He didn't want to go clean. He was selling my clean manifest to Damon. Damon was using them as cover, running his own dirt, framing me, forcing me to stay in the mud to protect myself. Ilya. He set us all up. Juniper absorbed this, the full, ugly truth. It all made sense. The logo, the hard drive, the trap. He had taken a bullet because his own man had betrayed him. She knelt in front of him, her hands resting on his knees, just to feel the solid reality of him. Her anger was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. She looked into his pained, steady eyes. Then we'd drag him into the light. He looked at her, a spark of something surprise, admiration in his gaze. He reached out with his good hand, not touching her, but just holding it in the space between them. The warmth radiating from his body was not just from the fever of the wound. It was the only heat in the vast, cold, metal space. And she leaned into it, no longer afraid of the cold. Huxley Morrow worked with battlefield efficiency. He had stitched the entry and exit wounds on Caspian's arm, pumped him full of antibiotics and fluids, and strapped the arm tightly to his chest. Caspian was now in the map room, pale, furious, and radiating a pain he refused to acknowledge. He was drinking black coffee, his good hand drumming a silent, angry rhythm on the oak table. Juniper sat across from him. The fog of fear and reaction had finally evaporated, leaving behind a cold, crystalline clarity. She had her backpack. She placed it on the table and pulled out the small, black external hard drive. "He wants this," she said, her voice flat. "He wants you," Caspian countered, his voice a low growl. "This is just the excuse." "He wants this," she insisted, sliding it across the table. "This is the proof he framed me with. He needs it to complete his narrative. He needs it to prove to the Bark that your ships are dirty. He thinks I'm scared, and he thinks I'm stupid." "You are neither," Caspian stated. "No, I'm not." She opened her laptop, the one Kate had retrieved from the wreckage of the bridge ambush. She logged into a secure messaging application, the one Damon had forced her to use months ago. "Ilya failed his mission. He'll be desperate. He thinks I'm just a package he lost, and he'll still be monitoring this channel." Her fingers flew across the keyboard, typing a message into a group chat she knew Ilya was in. "He took my phone. I'm trapped. I'm scared. I have the drive. I'll trade it for a way out. Just get me away from him. I'm at the old Perigee ferry dock." She added the location ping. A pin dropped on a derelict pier on the industrial side of the bay. Caspian watched her. His eyes narrowed. "You're baiting a trap." "I'm setting the terms," she replied. The response from Ilya came less than 60 seconds later. "Knew you were smart. Junie, stay put. I'll come for you. Come alone. We'll get you free." "Perigee ferry," Caspian said. Pushing himself to his feet, he grabbed his phone with his good hand. "Kate is already sweeping the industrial sector. I'll have a tactical team in place in 10 minutes. We end this, we end them both." "No." He stopped, turning to face her. The look in his eyes was one of cold, hard disbelief. "No team," Juniper said, her voice shaking but gaining strength. He said, "Come alone. If he sees Cade, if he sees a single shadow that looks like one of your men, he's gone, or he'll kill me the second he sees me. He has to believe I am exactly what he's always thought I was: desperate, terrified, and completely alone, just like I was in the storm. It's the only way he'll show his face." "That's a suicide mission, Juniper?" "It's the only way he'll confess." In a dark surveillance van parked 3 blocks away from the ferry dock, Agent Argent tied Leora Penn pulled her headphones tight. "She's doing it. She's flushing him out herself. She's moving to the ferry, alone." A senior agent beside her grunted, "Rourke will never let her walk in there alone. He'll sanitize the place. He'll liquidate Ilya before we get a word of usable evidence." "Hold position!" The static-laced voice of their supervisor came over the comms. "We do not engage unless Miss Hale's life is in imminent danger. We need the confession on tape. We need the meat. Stand down." The Perigee ferry dock was a graveyard of rotting wood and rusted metal. The skeletons of old boats listed in the black. Oily water. The rain had softened to a cold, penetrating drizzle. Juniper walked onto the long, decaying pier, the wind whipping her wet hair across her face. In her hand, she clutched an empty hard drive enclosure, the plastic slick with rain. Ilya stepped out from the shadows of a defunct, boarded-up ticket booth. He had shed his Rourke syndicate suit, now wearing dark jeans and a heavy jacket, an attempt to look like a civilian, a savior. He smiled, a practiced, reassuring expression that made her skin crawl. "Junie, you did the right thing. he said, his voice dripping with false warmth. He walked toward her, his hands open and visible. She flinched, playing the part. "Where's Damon you said you'd get me out?" "He's not far. We're getting you out of Ashfall Bay tonight, away from him." Ilya gestured back toward the city skyline, toward Caspian's estate. "Caspian will bury you. You know, he'll keep you in that glass house like a pretty, fragile bird. He'll never let you go. You're a witness, a liability. Damon. He's offering you real freedom." Juniper looked down at the empty plastic case in her hand. She let out a small, shaky breath. He respects me." Ilya laughed, a short, sharp bark. "Respect. He respects his assets, his ships, his containers. That's all you'll ever be to him." "No," she said. She looked up, her eyes clear and cold, locking with his. She wasn't acting anymore. "Last night, in the hotel." Ilya's smile faltered. "He didn't grab," she continued, her voice low and steady, a psychological blade. "He didn't demand, he didn't take." She was remembering the kiss, the question in his eyes, the way his hands had cupped her face, the way he let her be the one to pull him closer. "He waited. He asked. He made sure I was there. With him. That's respect. Something you wouldn't understand, and something Damon never will." Ilya's face tightened. He saw it. The fear in her eyes was gone, replaced by a steel he had never seen. He saw, in that instant, that he had lost, that she knew everything. His hand twitched toward the pocket of his jacket. "She always was too clever for you," a new voice snarled. Damon Klein emerged from behind a stack of rusted lobster pots. He was wired, thin, his eyes darting nervously. He was not holding a gun. He was holding a small, black device with a glowing red panel and a keypad, a pulse emitter. "You just had to make it complicated, didn't you? Junie," Damon spat. "Give me the drive." "Damon, what is that thing?" Ilya asked, his eyes on the device. "Insurance," Damon laughed, a high-pitched, ugly sound. "Rourke's new legitimate empire is all digital. Every asset, every dollar, every contract, all tied to a central server. This little toy is keyed to the die packs in his digital vaults. One pulse, and I wipe him out. I send his entire operation back to the Stone Age. I will liquidate him and send this whole bay into chaos." He was bluffing, but he was desperate enough to try. "The drive, Juniper. Now." "It's right here," she said, holding out the plastic case. She was stalling. The BOARC van was 300 yards away. Their directional mics were powerful, but she needed Damon's full confession. "You get this, and you let me go. You let us both go." "Sure, Junie, sure," Damon said, his eyes fixed on the drive. "Just tell me, what did you tell him? What does he know about the burqa?" "He knows everything," she said, projecting her voice, letting the wind carry it. "He knows you and Ilya have been framing him. He knows you've been selling his clean shipping manifest to run your own contraband. That's what's on this drive. All of it, the invoices, the ones you made me print. It's all right here." "She's lying, grab it," Ilya shouted, his panic rising. Damon lunged, but Ilya, desperate to prove his value, snatched the hard drive from Juniper's hand first. "I've got it. Damon, I have it. I told you I could deliver her." He fumbled with the plastic casing, his cold, wet fingers slipping. I can't." "It's empty," Juniper said, her voice quiet. Ilya ripped the plastic shell in half. It was hollow. 2 pieces of black plastic. Nothing inside. He stared at them, his face a mask of confusion, then absolute terror. Damon's face contorted into a mask of rage. "You," he roared, turning on Ilya, raising the emitter like a club. "You set me up. You were working with her this whole time." "No, Damon, I swear, I didn't know." Damon lunged at Ilya, shoving him to the ground. The 2 traitors, the snake and the rat, began to scramble on the wet, slippery pier. Damon's gun was out. He pointed it at Ilya's face. Juniper backed away slowly, her job done, the trap sprung. In the distance, a sound cut through the drizzle, low, deep, and powerful. The horn of a cargo ship, signaling its approach to the harbor. But it wasn't a cargo ship. It was Cade. It was the signal. The rescue was here. The deep, resonant blast of the ship's horn was not a warning. It was a trigger. Before Damon or Ilya could react to the sound, the abandoned pier erupted. On either side of the long dock, massive, dormant fire suppression pumps, rusted but functional, roared to life. Caspian and Cade had activated them from a control box in the warehouse. 2 thick, pressurized columns of seawater blasted across the pier, not aimed at the men, but at the air above them. The water hit the rusted support beams of the ferry terminal, atomizing into a blinding, impenetrable wall of mist and spray. The world dissolved into a chaotic roar of water and noise. Damon yelled, but the sound was stolen. High above, on the wharf's loading gantries, a bank of floodlights snapped on, controlled remotely by Valera from the estate. They didn't just illuminate the scene. They flashed a precise, stabbing rhythm. ... dash dash dash, ... SOS. But the pattern was aimed, guiding. They were for Juniper, creating a strobing, disorienting pathway of light and shadow, showing her the only clear escape route. Damon was blinded, shielding his eyes. Juniper saw her opening. She didn't run. She moved toward Damon. He was still clutching the pulse emitter, his only remaining piece of leverage. Juniper's hand went to the small multi-tool on her belt, the one she'd had since her EMT days, the one she used for cutting seat belts and maintaining ambulance equipment. She lunged, not at Damon, but at the device. He swatted at her, but he was disoriented by the water and light. Her hand was quicker. She grabbed the heavy-duty wires running from the emitter to its battery pack. She clamped the jaws of the multi-tool and squeezed. The wires snapped. She ripped the now useless device from his hand and, in one smooth motion, threw it over the side of the pier. It hit the black, churning salt water with a faint plop. Damon's ultimate weapon, his key to Caspian's digital kingdom, was neutralized, shorted out by the bay itself. He roared in pure, animalistic rage. "You—" From the mist, Cade emerged. He moved with a brutal, silent efficiency. Ilya, scrambling to his feet, turned just in time to see him. Cade didn't raise his handgun. He raised a taser. The crack of the discharge was sharp, and the 2 probes hit Ilya square in the chest. Ilya went rigid, a choked cry on his lips, before collapsing onto the wet planks, neutralized without a permanent scratch. Caspian stepped out of the shadows, his left arm strapped tightly to his chest, his right hand clenched. He faced Damon. The rain and seawater plastered his hair to his face, his white shirt now soaked and translucent, revealing the heavy bandages beneath. Damon, robbed of his bomb and his partner, scrambled backward, his eyes wild. He was a cornered rat. He charged, swinging a wild punch. Caspian didn't have his full strength, but he had a lifetime of this. He moved inside the punch, blocking with his good arm, using Damon's own momentum to turn him. It wasn't a brawl, it was a disassembly. Caspian, even injured, was a master of leverage and control. He avoided his wounded side, using his legs and core, fighting a smart, contained battle in the driving rain. Damon was no match for him. He was desperate and sloppy. Caspian slammed him against a piling. Damon, his face bloody, slid to the ground. He looked up, his expression broken. Then his hand darted inside his jacket. He pulled a small-caliber pistol. "Caspian, down!" Juniper screamed. Caspian didn't hesitate. He dropped, collapsing onto the pier just as Damon fired. The shot went wide, the bullet sparking harmlessly off a steel support column behind him. Before Damon could fire again, a shot cracked from the mist. Cade, firing into the air, a clean warning shot. It was not for Damon, it was for the Burke. A loud, clear, undeniable audio record that their lives were in danger, that the use of force was justified. Burke Freeze dropped the weapon. Armed agents led by Leora Penn, Argent Tide swarmed the pier, emerging from the shadows, their weapons trained. Damon saw he was surrounded in one last desperate act. He lunged, not at Caspian, but at the nearest Burke agent, grabbing him, pulling him into a chokehold, and pressing the muzzle of his pistol to the agent's temple. "Back off!" Damon shrieked, his voice cracking. "All of you, back off, or I'll kill him, I swear to God." The pier went silent, a tense, frozen standoff. Leora had her gun on Damon, but the shot was too risky. Caspian was on the ground, 10 feet away. He didn't get up. He looked to his left. Beside him was a massive coiled drum of heavy nylon anchor rope, the kind used for mooring freighters. It weighed hundreds of pounds. He looked at Leora. He met her eyes. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod toward the drum. Leora's eyes widened slightly. She understood. Caspian, with his one good arm, grunted and shoved. He didn't lift. He rolled. The massive drum, heavy as a small car, began to roll across the slick, wet pier, gaining momentum, aimed not at Damon, but at his legs. "What?" Damon started to say. The drum hit him low and hard, sweeping his legs out from under him. He lost his balance, his grip on the agent breaking. His pistol clattering to the deck, the agent scrambled free. Damon slipped, his body skidding on the wet, mossy edge of the pier. He teetered, half over the black water. He looked up, his eyes wide with terror, expecting Caspian to finish it, to kick him into the bay. Caspian just watched him. He walked over, his good hand retrieving the fallen gun, and tossed it to Leora. He knelt, not in anger, but with a cold finality. He grabbed Damon's jacket and hauled him back onto the safety of the pier. He didn't kill him. He didn't even hit him. He turned him over, bound his hands with a zip tie from Cade, and left him for the feds, along with the complete, recorded confession. The rain began to wash the blood from the pier, leaving only a faint, diluted stain. Nearby, Burke agents cuffed a shaking, defeated Ilya. He looked up as Juniper walked past. His gaze was a toxic mixture of shame, hatred, and utter defeat. He had lost everything. Juniper met his gaze. She held it, and she said nothing. Her silence was the final, definitive judgment. She walked to Caspian, who was standing tall, breathing heavily in the cold, wet air. She saw the tremor in his good hand, a reaction to the adrenaline, the fight, the pain. She was shaking, too. He looked at her, and his good hand found hers. He didn't say a word. He just squeezed, his grip tight, possessive, grounding. They both stood there, shaking, but upright, together in the aftermath of the storm. The debriefing took place in Caspian's own study, the room. Once his sanctuary of control, now felt like neutral, occupied territory. Leora Penn Agent Argent Tide sat across from his desk. She was professional, her jacket crisp, her face giving nothing away. Caspian stood by the window, his arm in a black silk sling, the pain a dull, constant throb beneath his ribs. Juniper sat in a leather chair between them, a silent, critical observer. Damon Klein and Ilya Romanov are in federal custody, Leora began, her voice crisp. They have given full, detailed confessions. They've laid out the entire 7th Pier operation and its connections to your former network. The Bureau is pleased. We have what we need to dismantle Klein's crew. She paused, steepling her fingers. Which brings us to you, Mr. Rourke. You provided invaluable, if unofficial, assistance. The Burke is willing to be pragmatic. We know you are restructuring. We know Klein and Romanov were framing you, but your old network, that's a different story. It's a house of cards we've wanted for a long time. This was it, the negotiation. Caspian remained silent, his gaze fixed on the harbor. Here is the offer, Leora said. You give us the rest of it. The old routes, the offshore ledgers, the retired contacts, full, voluntary cooperation. In exchange, the BARC will focus its resources on the evidence you provided. Your past organization will be quietly dismantled, and your name will remain. Unburdened. A clean slate. Juniper's stomach tightened. It was the deal he wanted, his way out. There is one condition, Leora added, her gaze shifting to Juniper. "For this case to be ironclad, for your immunity to be guaranteed. Miss Hale's testimony is critical. She is the linchpin. As such, she must be protected. She will enter the Federal Witness Protection Program, effective immediately. New name, new city, new life. All contact, of course, will be severed." The silence that fell was heavy, suffocating. It was the price. The clean break he had been working toward, his entire future, in exchange for her. Juniper looked at Caspian's back. She saw the tension in his shoulders, the rigid line of his spine. She understood. He had to take it. She had been the chaos that blew into his life, and now she was the one thing standing between him and the legitimacy he craved. She would not be his cage. Later, after Leora had left, they stood in the conservatory. The storm had finally broken, weak. Watery sunlight was beginning to filter through the clouds, painting the damp leaves of the citrus trees in a pale, hopeful light. Juniper was the first to speak. Her voice was quiet, but it didn't tremble. "You have to take the deal, Caspian." He turned slowly. His face was pale, etched with fatigue and pain. "I will not." "Yes, you will," she insisted, walking toward him. "This is your restructuring. It's your way out. It's what you wanted before I ever fell on your doorstep. I won't be the reason you stay chained to the past." "I am not trading you for my own absolution," he said, his voice a low, rough growl. "That is not a choice." "Don't you see?" she pleaded, her hands clenching at her sides. "This is the one thing I can do. I can give you that. I'm good at disappearing. I was doing it when you found me. I'll be safe." "Safe," he repeated, the word tasting like ash. "And alone. And you will be gone. That is not safety. Juniper, that's a prison. I will not put you in one." "Then what?" she cried, her frustration breaking. "We both stay in the mud. You'll let what we have, be the one vulnerability that sinks your entire life. I won't let you. I'll leave. I'll walk out that front gate right now." He caught her arm, his grip firm with his good hand, his eyes blazing. "No, you're right. I won't let you be a vulnerability. I won't let you be an anchor. But I won't let you be a sacrifice either." He looked past her, at the sunlight finally hitting the floor. A new, dangerous, and brilliant idea was forming in his eyes. "We don't need to run from the shadows," he said, a strange, cold calm settling over him. "We're going to turn on the lights, all of them." 2 days later, Caspian Rourke stood on the steps of the Ashfall Bay City Hall, his arm in a sling, his face bruised but resolute. He was surrounded by a stunned, frantic press corps. To his right, looking bewildered and deeply unhappy, stood Agent Leora Penn. He stepped to the microphone. "For decades, the business of the Rourke Syndicate has been conducted in the shadows. We profited from a system of gray areas and closed doors. Today, that ends." A flash of cameras. "As of 9 o'clock this morning, I have signed documents dissolving the Rourke Syndicate. In its place, I have formed the Silver Key Fund, a new public-private cooperative, all former Rourke maritime assets. Our ships, our warehouses, our contracts are being transferred to this fund to be managed as a community trust for the restoration of the harbor." The reporters shouted questions. Caspian raised his good hand. "This is not a gift," he continued, his voice ringing out. "It is an act of transparency. And to ensure that transparency, the Silver Key Fund will operate under the full and permanent oversight of a board of local merchants and the Bureau of Interstate Racketeering Control." He looked directly at Leora. Her face was granite. He had checkmated her by inviting the Burke in publicly. He had taken away their leverage. They couldn't refuse. And by turning his assets over to a public trust, his old shadow network was instantly starved, cut off at the root. It withered and died without a single shot fired. "I am not admitting to crimes I did not commit," Caspian said, his eyes finding the camera, "but I am accepting full civil and moral responsibility for the system I once upheld. The shadows end here." The B-Ark was trapped, forced into the light by the very evidence they had gathered. They could no longer force Juniper Hale into the shadows. She was not a fleeing witness. She was the catalyst for the single largest anti-racketeering reform in the city's history. They didn't hide her. They recruited her, asking her to consult, to help train agents on how to spot and support victims caught in criminal enterprises. Leora Penn gave Caspian one last appraising look before she left his estate. "If you really want to stay clean, Mr. Rourke," she advised, a flicker of grudging respect in her eyes, "I'd suggest you keep the light in your house." That evening, Caspian found Juniper in the conservatory. The air was cool, the scent of citrus and damp earth filling the room. He walked to the massive glass doors that led to the terrace. He unlocked them and, with his good arm, slid them open. Clean, cool air, smelling of the sea and the scrubbed clean world, flooded the room. The sun was setting, and the light was golden. Juniper walked past him, stepping out onto the terrace, into the light. She stopped and held out her hand to him. He took it. He stepped out of the glass house and into the open air with her. They were not running. They were staying. He pulled her close, his good arm wrapping around her waist, his bandaged arm resting against her back. He buried his face in her hair, breathing her in. His voice was low, his pulse steady and warm against her hand. "No one gets to hide you as evidence. Juniper," he said, his voice thick with an emotion she had never heard from him. "You are not a liability. You are the choice." The fallout was as swift as the storm. The Seventh Pier crew, decapitated, imploded. Damon Klein, facing a mountain of evidence from his own partners and the Bark, was indicted on federal racketeering charges. Ilya Romanov, the man who had been a ghost in Caspian's organization, took a plea deal. He cooperated, he confessed, he laid bare the inner workings of the network he had betrayed. He was given a reduced sentence, but it was a life sentence nonetheless, a life of looking over his shoulder. There is no glory for a traitor. The Rourke Syndicate, a name whispered in fear for 2 decades, was officially dissolved. In its place, the Rourke Maritime Cooperative began operations. Its charter was public. Its books were open. It now functioned under the joint supervision of the Port Security Commission and a new civilian board, made up of local fishermen and harbor merchants. The transition was brutal, but clean. Life at the estate found a new, quieter rhythm. Valera Quinn, her steely composure fully restored, hung a small, elegant sign on the main gate. No drones. She was seen, once or twice, smiling, a thin, satisfied expression. Cade, his duty as a driver now secondary, started a free coastal first aid class on the weekends. Juniper, naturally, was the lead instructor. The nights were the most profound change. The house was no longer a fortress, but a home. The generators were silent. Juniper and Caspian found themselves back in the conservatory. The doors were wide open to the night air, which was cool and clean. The only sounds were the distant call of frogs from the marsh and the rustle of leaves. The sharp green scent of the citrus trees filled the room. They met in the center of the room, not with the frantic energy of before, but with a slow, knowing smile. They sat together on the wide bench made of reclaimed ship's wood. He was in a soft shirt, his arm healing well, the sling now gone. She wore one of his sweatshirts, but it no longer felt like a costume. It was just comfortable. He reached for her hand, not her right, but her left. The one that had been scraped raw on the concrete median, the one whose knuckles had been cracked and bleeding from the salt wind. He lifted it, turning it over in his own. The wounds were gone, leaving only pale, silvery scars. Caspian lowered his head and pressed a slow, warm kiss to her knuckles. He kissed the center of her palm, and then, with his thumb, he gently traced the healed lines, as if mapping the journey she had taken. She watched him, her heart full, a quiet, aching warmth spreading through her chest. She leaned her head against his good shoulder, and his arm came around her, pulling her close. They sat in silence for a long time, their breathing sinking, his steady, hers soft. She felt the slow, strong beat of his heart under her ear. "Here," she whispered, her voice barely a sound. "Here," he whispered back, his lips brushing her hair. It was not just a location, it was a vow. His hand found hers, their fingers lacing together. He shifted, gently guiding her to lie down on the wide, cushioned bench on her side. He lay down facing her, his good arm supporting him, their bodies close but not crushing, a line of warmth from chest to knee. He used his free hand to cup her face, his thumb stroking her cheekbone, just as he had in the hotel. But this time, there was no fear, no window, no storm, no Juniper, he murmured, as if the name itself was a revelation. She brought her own hand up, her fingers tangling in the thick, soft hair at the nape of his neck. She pulled him closer, until their foreheads rested together. They just breathed, sharing the same air. Then, he kissed her. It was a long, slow, deep kiss that held no desperation, only discovery. It was a kiss of presence, of absolute, shared, mutual consent. It was the quiet, profound language of two people who had seen the worst and had chosen to stay. She smiled against his lips, a small, choked laugh of pure, unadulterated relief. He kissed the smile, and she felt the answering rumble of his own laugh in his chest. They held each other, their limbs tangled, his hand stroking her back, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. It was an intimacy built not on passion, but on a foundation of respect, a shared fight, and an earned peace. The next morning, the sunlight was bright, the sky a sharp, clear blue. They were outside, by the new seawall. Between them was a small, young olive tree. They worked together, their hands in the rich, dark soil, planting it deep in the ground, a symbol of a peace that was meant to last. When they finished, they were both streaked with dirt, sweat glistening on their foreheads, mingling with the salt from the sea breeze. The BIARC officially signed the memorandum ending the first phase of their inspection. Leora Penn stopped by, not as an agent, but as an observer. She handed Juniper a simple business card. "When you need to keep the lights on," Leora said, "you call me." Caspian did one last thing. The old warehouse, the dark, rusted place where they had hidden, where Juniper had patched his wound, was gutted. He opened its massive bay doors and turned it into the Ashfall Bay Storm Recovery Center, a community hub for supplies and rebuilding. Juniper, standing beside him, designed its first program, Safety in Your Hands. She taught self-defense and emergency trauma care to the women of the Key. She was no longer running. She was teaching others how to stand their ground. That night, they were in the conservatory again. Caspian stood at the radar, which he now left on, more out of habit than necessity. He watched the screen. A new storm system, a small, tight spiral, was forming far out in the Atlantic. It was just a smear of green on the screen. It held no threat. He felt Juniper come to stand behind him. She wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her cheek against the strong, solid plane of his back. He reached back, his good hand covering hers, lacing their fingers together over his heart. He looked at her reflection in the dark radar screen, then at the distant, harmless storm. He pulled her hands tighter, holding her. "No one," he whispered, his voice a low, gravelly promise, "touches what's mine." The sea breeze, clean and steady, blew through the open glass doors, and in the bay below, Ashfall Bay, scarred but healing, lived on. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts so we can all connect. And if you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe to my channel, Mafia Boss Story, like this video, and give it an extra boost by hitting that hype button. It helps more people find these stories.